Owen Caldwell's knees hit the wet pavement of Riverside Park with a sound that echoed his breaking heart. The crumpled hospital bill in his trembling fist read $247,000, numbers that might as well have been written in a foreign language for a mechanic earning $38,000 a year. Before him sat a woman in an expensive coat, perfectly manicured hands frozen over financial documents she'd dropped when this desperate father collapsed at her feet. "Please." Owen's voice cracked as tears streamed down his oil-stained cheeks. "I'm begging you. My daughter is dying and I can't save her." The stranger's briefcase bore the logo of Brooks Innovation, but Owen couldn't have known he was pleading with someone who could write that check without feeling it. What happened next would change everything about what both of them believed about strangers, desperation, and the true meaning of salvation. The afternoon light filtered through autumn leaves, casting dancing shadows across the park bench, where Veronica Brooks had been reviewing quarterly reports. Her $800 blazer contrasted sharply with the worn denim and faded flannel of the man now sobbing at her feet. She had come here to escape the sterile boardroom atmosphere, to think clearly about the merger proposal that could make Brooks Innovation even more profitable. Instead, she found herself staring into the desperate eyes of a father whose world was crumbling around him. The corporate documents scattered around her feet seemed suddenly meaningless compared to the raw human anguish before her. "Stand up," she said quietly, her voice carrying an authority that came from years of commanding boardrooms. "Tell me about your daughter." Owen's head lifted slowly, confusion replacing some of the desperation in his red-rimmed eyes. Most people would have called security or hurried away from such a scene. Instead, this stranger was asking him to explain the nightmare that had consumed his life for the past week. He struggled to his feet, wiping his nose with the back of his sleeve, aware of how pathetic he must look to someone who clearly belonged to a different world entirely. "Her name is Harper," Owen began, his voice still shaking. "She's 8 years old, and she has a congenital heart defect that's gotten worse. The doctors say she needs surgery within 7 days, or—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The words hung in the cool October air like a death sentence neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Veronica found herself studying this man's face, noting the deep lines of worry etched around his eyes, the way his hands trembled not from cold, but from exhaustion and fear. There was something authentic about his desperation that cut through all her usual cynicism about people wanting her money. $247,000. Owen continued, holding up the crumpled bill like evidence of his failure. "I work at Miller's Auto Repair. I've been there 15 years, working double shifts since my wife died 3 years ago. I've got $3,200 in my checking account and a pickup truck with 200,000 miles on it. That's everything I have in this world except Harper." His voice broke again on his daughter's name. Veronica felt something shift inside her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced since her own childhood when her mother cleaned office buildings at night to pay for groceries. The silence stretched between them as joggers passed by, their footsteps rhythmic against the asphalt path. Children played on nearby swings, their laughter a bitter contrast to the conversation unfolding on the bench. Veronica's phone buzzed with texts from her assistant about the 3 o'clock meeting, but she ignored it. Something about Owen's desperation felt familiar, like an echo from her own past when her family had faced their own impossible choices. She remembered being 12 years old, wearing the same jeans to school for 2 weeks because they couldn't afford to do laundry, and how Mrs. Patterson, her 7th grade teacher, had quietly slipped $20 into her backpack with a note that said, "For lunch money. What if I told you I might be able to help?" The words escaped Veronica's lips before she could stop them. Owen's laugh was harsh and bitter, the sound of a man who had heard too many empty promises in the past week. He had called every relative he could remember, applied for loans from banks that wouldn't even return his calls, and even considered approaching loan sharks before his conscience stopped him. The idea that this well-dressed stranger sitting in a park could somehow solve his impossible problem seemed like the cruelest joke yet. "Lady, I appreciate the thought, but unless you've got $250,000 in your purse, there's nothing you can do." Owen started to turn away, but Veronica's hand on his arm stopped him. Her touch was gentle but firm, the grip of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a business card, the heavy card stock expensive between her fingers. Owen glanced at it without really seeing it, his mind too clouded with despair to process the words Chief Executive Officer beneath her name. "Take my number," she said, pressing the card into his palm. "I need to verify what you've told me, but if everything checks out—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "If everything checks out, we'll figure something out." Owen stared at the card as if it might disappear, the gold-embossed letters catching the fading sunlight. Part of him wanted to believe this stranger could somehow perform a miracle, but the rational part of his mind, the part that had learned not to trust in fairy tales, whispered that he was setting himself up for more disappointment. The next morning arrived grey and cold, matching Owen's mood as he sat beside Harper's hospital bed. His daughter looked so small against the white sheets, her blonde hair spread across the pillow like spun gold. The steady beep of the heart monitor provided a rhythmic backdrop to his thoughts, each sound a reminder that time was running out. Dr. Fitzgerald had been clear during yesterday's consultation. Harper's condition was deteriorating faster than they had hoped. The surgery needed to happen within 6 days now, not 7, and without a payment commitment from the family, the hospital's hands were tied. "Daddy, why do you look so sad?" Harper's voice was weak, but curious as she opened her eyes. Owen forced a smile, the same expression he had been practicing for 3 years since her mother's death. He had become an expert at hiding his fear, his exhaustion, and his sense of complete helplessness from the one person who mattered most in his world. The irony wasn't lost on him that he could fix any engine that rolled into Miller's auto repair, but he couldn't fix the one thing that truly mattered. "Just thinking about work stuff, sweetheart." He lied smoothly. "How are you feeling today?" Harper considered this question with the seriousness that only sick children possess. She had learned to catalogue her symptoms, to pay attention to the subtle changes in her body that adults found concerning. The shortness of breath that had gotten worse over the past month, the way her chest sometimes felt tight like someone was squeezing it, the fatigue that made even simple activities exhausting. "Better than yesterday," she said finally, though Owen could see the pale cast to her skin that suggested otherwise. "The nurse with the funny glasses said I might get to go home soon if I'm good." Owen's heart clenched at the innocence in her voice. Harper didn't understand that going home without surgery meant going home to die slowly, her heart gradually failing until it simply stopped. She thought being good and following the doctor's orders would somehow magic away the defect she'd been born with. Owen's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he glanced at the screen to see an unknown number. For a moment, he considered ignoring it. He had fielded enough calls from debt collectors and well-meaning relatives with insufficient solutions to last a lifetime. But something made him step into the hallway and answer. "Hello?" His voice came out rougher than intended, gravelly from too little sleep and too much coffee. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Veronica Brooks. We met yesterday in Riverside Park." Her voice was crisp and professional, the tone of someone accustomed to conducting important business over the phone. Owen felt a flicker of something that might have been hope, quickly suppressed by the voice of experience that reminded him not to get his expectations up. "I've done some checking into your situation, and I'd like to meet with you this afternoon if possible." The rest of the conversation passed in a blur of arrangements and logistics. They would meet at 3 o'clock in the hospital cafeteria, neutral ground where they could talk without the pressure of Harper's condition hanging over them quite so heavily. Owen spent the intervening hours trying to manage his expectations, reminding himself that even if this woman was genuinely trying to help, there were limits to what any individual could or would do for a stranger. People didn't just hand out $250,000 gifts to people they'd met once in a park. When 3 o'clock arrived, Owen found Veronica already seated at a corner table, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of her as she reviewed a manila folder. She looked different in the fluorescent hospital lighting, less like the mysterious stranger from the park, and more like what she actually was. A successful businesswoman who clearly didn't belong in this setting. Her presence drew subtle glances from other visitors and staff, the kind of attention that money and power naturally attracted even in casual settings. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as Owen approached, gesturing for him to sit across from her. "I want to be completely transparent with you about who I am and what I can offer." She slid the manila folder across the table, and Owen opened it to find printouts of news articles, financial documents, and what appeared to be a background check on himself. His initial reaction was a mixture of invasion and intrigue. Who was this woman that she could gather this kind of information in less than 24 hours? "Brooks Innovation is a medical technology company that I founded 12 years ago," Veronica continued, her voice steady and matter-of-fact. "We develop devices and software for cardiac surgery procedures. Last year, our revenue was $340 million, and my personal net worth is approximately the same amount." The numbers hit Owen like physical blows. He had never sat across from someone who could casually mention having more money than he could comprehend, let alone someone who might be willing to use that money to help a stranger. Owen's hands shook as he flipped through the folder, seeing his own life reflected back at him through official documents and newspaper clippings. There was the obituary for his wife, Sarah, the article about Harper's fundraising efforts at her elementary school, even a piece from 2 years ago when he had helped rescue 3 people from a house fire in his neighborhood. Veronica had done her homework thoroughly, painting a complete picture of who he was and why he might be worthy of help. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Owen looked up from the documents to meet Veronica's eyes, searching for any sign of hidden agenda or ulterior motive. "Why would someone like you help someone like me? What do you want in return?" It was the question that had kept him awake the previous night, turning over every possible angle and scenario. In his experience, nothing came free, especially not something as valuable as his daughter's life. Veronica was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup, as she considered how to explain something she barely understood herself. "I grew up in a trailer park in Ohio," she said finally. "My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us fed and housed, and even then, there were months when we had to choose between groceries and electricity. When I was in 7th grade, I wore the same pair of jeans to school for 2 weeks because we couldn't afford quarters for the laundromat." The confession hung between them like a bridge spanning 2 different worlds. Owen had assumed that someone with Veronica's obvious wealth and polish had been born into privilege, had never known what it felt like to count pennies or worry about basic necessities. Learning that she had walked a path similar to his own shifted something fundamental in his understanding of who she was and why she might be sitting across from him in a hospital cafeteria. Mrs. Patterson was my English teacher that year, Veronica continued, her voice softer now, touched with the kind of emotion that successful people rarely allowed themselves to show. She noticed that I wasn't eating lunch, that I was falling asleep in class because I was staying up late doing homework by candlelight when the power got cut off. One day she slipped $40 into my backpack with a note that said, "Because everyone deserves a chance to succeed." Owen felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't born of desperation. There was something profound about learning that this polished, successful woman remembered what it felt like to be powerless, to be at the mercy of circumstances beyond her control. It explained why she hadn't walked away from him in the park, why she had taken the time to investigate his story instead of dismissing him as another panhandler with a sob story. "That $40 changed my life," Veronica said, meeting Owen's eyes directly. "Not because of the money itself, but because it showed me that someone believed I was worth investing in. It gave me hope when I had none left, and hope is what kept me going through high school, through college, through the early years of building my company when everyone said I was too young and too naive to succeed. The cafeteria buzzed with the typical afternoon activity. Families grabbing quick meals between hospital visits, medical staff taking brief breaks from their rounds, the constant flow of people dealing with their own crises and challenges. But at their corner table, Owen and Veronica existed in a bubble of shared understanding. Two people from different worlds, connected by the universal experience of needing help and the profound impact of receiving it. "I can't pay you back," Owen said, the words heavy with the weight of a man's pride. "Not ever. If you help Harper, I'll be in your debt for the rest of my life, and there's nothing I can offer in return that could possibly equal what you're giving us. It was a hard truth to acknowledge, that accepting help would fundamentally change his relationship with his own sense of independence and self-sufficiency. Veronica smiled for the first time since they had met, and the expression transformed her entire face. "Mr. Caldwell Owen, you're thinking about this all wrong. I'm not asking you to pay me back. I'm asking you to pay it forward. Someday, when you're in a position to help someone else who's facing an impossible situation, I want you to remember how this feels and choose to be that person for them." The concept was so foreign to Owen's experience that he struggled to process it. In his world, debts were real and had to be repaid. Favors came with strings attached, and nothing was ever truly free. The idea that someone would give him $250,000 with no expectation of direct repayment seemed like something that happened in movies, not in real life to ordinary people like him. But as he looked at Veronica's face, he saw the sincerity there, the echo of a 12-year-old girl who had been lifted up by a teacher's kindness and had spent the rest of her life looking for ways to pass that gift along to others. It wasn't charity in the traditional sense. It was something deeper, more meaningful, a recognition that everyone deserved the chance to save the people they loved. "There's one condition," Veronica added, her voice taking on a more businesslike tone. "I want to establish a relationship with Harper as she grows up, not as a benefactor or a savior, but as someone who cares about her future. I want to know that she grows up healthy and happy, that this surgery gives her the chance to become whoever she's meant to be." Owen nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. This wasn't about money at all. It was about connection, about the human need to matter in someone else's life. Veronica had achieved everything that society said should make a person happy: wealth, success, recognition. But Owen sensed a loneliness in her that all the money in the world couldn't cure, a need to be part of something more meaningful than quarterly profit reports and board meetings. She'd like that, Owen said, his voice thick with emotion. Harper loves meeting new people, and she's always asking me to tell her stories about her mother. I think she'd enjoy having another strong woman in her life to look up to. The image of Harper and Veronica together felt right, somehow, like puzzle pieces clicking into place. His daughter needed role models who could show her that being female didn't mean accepting limitations, and Veronica needed to remember what it felt like to be part of a family. The next few hours moved with the surreal efficiency that money could provide. Veronica made 3 phone calls from the hospital cafeteria, and by evening, Harper's surgery was scheduled for the following morning. The hospital's financial department, which had been politely but firmly demanding payment guarantees for days, suddenly became accommodating and helpful. Owen watched this transformation with a mixture of gratitude and amazement, seeing firsthand how quickly impossible problems could be solved when someone with resources decided to care. That evening, as Owen sat beside Harper's bed explaining that the surgery was definitely going to happen, he struggled to find words that could convey the magnitude of what had occurred without overwhelming his 8-year-old daughter. How do you explain to a child that a stranger has essentially given them their life back? How do you help them understand the weight of such a gift without burdening them with obligation they're too young to carry? "A nice lady is helping us pay for your surgery," he said simply, smoothing Harper's hair back from her forehead. "Her name is Veronica, and she's very excited to meet you when you're feeling better." Harper's eyes lit up with the curiosity that had always defined her personality, the same quality that had made her mother laugh and worry in equal measure. "Is she your girlfriend?" Harper asked with the directness that only children possess. Owen laughed despite himself, the first genuine moment of levity he had experienced in weeks. "No, sweetheart, she's not my girlfriend. She's just someone who believes that everyone deserves to be healthy and happy, and she wants to help make sure you get your chance to grow up strong." Surgery day arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes after a sleepless night of anticipation. Owen had spent the hours pacing the hospital corridors, alternately praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in, and trying to prepare himself for every possible outcome. Dr. Fitzgerald had been cautiously optimistic during the pre-surgery consultation, explaining that Harper's case, while complex, was well within his expertise. The procedure would take approximately 8 hours, and barring any unexpected complications, Harper should make a full recovery. Veronica arrived at the hospital just as Harper was being prepped for surgery, carrying a small wrapped package and wearing an expression of nervous anticipation that mirrored Owen's own. She had traded her usual business attire for jeans and a sweater, looking more like someone who belonged in a family waiting room than a boardroom. The transformation was subtle but significant, a visual reminder that money and success didn't necessarily create distance between people unless they chose to let it. "I brought Harper something," Veronica said, offering Owen the package. "Just a little something to help her remember that she's braver than she knows." Inside the wrapping was a small silver pendant in the shape of a heart, simple but elegant, the kind of jewelry that would grow with a young girl as she became a woman. On the back, engraved in delicate script, were the words "Brave Heart" and the date of Harper's surgery. The hours of waiting stretched endlessly, filled with the particular anxiety that comes with having someone you love completely beyond your ability to help or protect. Owen and Veronica found themselves talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. She told him about the early days of her company, when she had maxed out 6 credit cards and slept on the office floor to save money on rent. He shared memories of Sarah, the way she had sung to Harper when she couldn't sleep, her terrible cooking that he had pretended to enjoy for 15 years of marriage. Gradually, the conversation turned to deeper territories. Veronica admitted that for all her success, she had never felt truly connected to another person since her mother's death 5 years earlier. Her relationships had been built around business interests or social obligations, lacking the authentic warmth that came from being valued for who you were rather than what you could provide. Owen spoke about the loneliness of single parenthood, the weight of making every decision alone, the fear that he wasn't enough for Harper on his own. "I think," Veronica said during one of the longer silences, "that we're both learning something important today. You're discovering that it's okay to accept help when you need it, and I'm remembering what it feels like to be needed for the right reasons." The observation hung between them, like a truth that neither had been willing to acknowledge until that moment. When Dr. Fitzgerald finally emerged from the surgical suite, his smile told them everything they needed to know before he spoke a word. "The surgery was a complete success," he announced, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a job well done. "Harper's heart is functioning perfectly, and we don't anticipate any complications. She'll be in recovery for a few hours, but you should be able to see her this evening." Owen's legs gave out, and he found himself sitting heavily in the waiting room chair, overcome by relief so profound it felt like drowning in reverse. For the first time in months, he could take a deep breath without the weight of impending loss crushing his chest. Veronica placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. They had both invested everything in this moment. Owen his hope, Veronica her faith, that money could sometimes solve the problems that mattered most. The first time Harper met Veronica, she was still groggy from anesthesia but alert enough to be curious about the woman sitting beside her father. "Are you the angel lady?" she asked in a voice made hoarse by the breathing tube that had been removed earlier. Veronica laughed softly, charmed by the child's directness and the echo of her father's authenticity. "I'm just a friend," Veronica replied, though even as she said it, she knew the word was insufficient to describe what she was becoming to this family. "Your daddy tells me you're very brave, and I wanted to meet the bravest girl in the hospital." Harper considered this seriously, as she considered most things, before nodding her approval of this explanation. Over the following days, as Harper recovered and gained strength, a routine developed among the 3 of them. Veronica would arrive each morning with coffee for Owen and small gifts for Harper books, puzzles, art supplies, to keep a restless 8-year-old occupied during the long hours of healing. She had cleared her calendar indefinitely, telling her assistant that she was dealing with a family emergency, which wasn't entirely untrue. The transformation in Owen was subtle, but unmistakable. The lines of constant worry around his eyes began to soften, and for the first time since Sarah's death, he allowed himself to believe that the future might hold more possibilities than just survival. He started talking about plans beyond the immediate crisis, Harper's return to school, the vacation they had never been able to afford, the college fund he could now realistically consider starting. "I've been thinking," Owen said one afternoon as they watched Harper color in a new art book, "about what you said about paying it forward. I want to start something at the hospital, maybe a fund to help other families in situations like ours. Nothing as big as what you did for us, but something that could make a difference for people who are where we were a week ago. Veronica felt something click into place in her chest, a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since the early days of building her company. What if it could be bigger than that? She asked, her mind already racing with possibilities. What if we started a foundation specifically focused on medical emergencies for single parents? We could call it Harper's Hope, not just a fund, but a comprehensive support system for families facing impossible choices. The idea began to take shape as they talked, growing from a simple concept into something with real potential for impact. Veronica had the resources and business expertise to make it substantial, while Owen brought the authenticity of lived experience and the emotional intelligence to understand what families in crisis actually needed. Together, they could create something that would honor the gift Harper had received by making sure other children didn't have to face the same impossible situation. 6 months later, Riverside Park looked exactly the same, but everything else had changed in ways that Owen could never have imagined during those desperate early days. Harper was not only fully recovered, but thriving, her energy restored, and her curiosity about the world stronger than ever. The scar on her chest had faded to a thin silver line that she wore like a badge of courage, proof that she had faced something scary and emerged victorious. Owen found Veronica sitting on the same bench where they had first met, though this time she was reviewing proposals for Harper's Hope Foundation rather than quarterly reports for Brooks Innovation. The foundation had grown beyond their wildest expectations, helping 43 families in its first 6 months and gaining national attention for its innovative approach to medical crisis support. "Daddy, there's Aunt Ronnie!" Harper called out, using the nickname she had bestowed upon Veronica during her hospital stay. She ran ahead, her backpack bouncing with the enthusiasm of a healthy 8-year-old who had just finished soccer practice and was eager to share every detail of her day. The sight never failed to move Owen, his daughter running freely, her breathing easy and natural, her future stretching ahead of her bright with possibility. "How was practice?" Veronica asked, catching Harper in a hug that had become as natural as breathing. Over the months, she had attended Harper's school plays, cheered at soccer games, and helped with homework on countless evenings. She had become part of their family in a way that felt organic and inevitable, not because of what she had given them, but because of who she chose to be in their lives. "I scored 2 goals," Harper announced proudly. "And Mrs. Chen said I might make the traveling team next year if I keep practicing. Will you come to my games if I make the team?" The question was asked with the casual confidence of a child who had never doubted that the important people in her life would show up when it mattered. "I wouldn't miss them," Veronica promised, and Owen could see that she meant it completely. This woman who had once measured success in quarterly profits and market share now found her greatest satisfaction in the simple moments of watching a child grow and thrive. Her business continued to flourish, but it no longer defined her entire existence. As they walked through the park together, Harper skipping ahead to chase fallen leaves while the adults followed at a more measured pace, Owen reflected on the miracle of how much could change in such a short time. He was no longer the desperate man who had collapsed on this very path, begging a stranger for salvation. He had learned to accept help gracefully, to offer it when he could, and to understand that the greatest gifts were often the ones that created connection between people rather than obligation. "I got a call today from a father in Detroit," Owen said, pulling out his phone to show Veronica an email. "His son needs kidney surgery, and they've exhausted all their options. The foundation can cover the medical costs, but I was thinking maybe we could do more. Maybe I could fly out there and just be with them during the surgery, help them understand that they're not alone. Veronica smiled, recognizing in Owen's words the same impulse that had driven her to help them in the first place. "I think that's exactly what we should do," she agreed. "Being there, showing up sometimes, that matters more than the money itself." It was a lesson they had both learned through their own experience, that the most profound gifts were often the ones that couldn't be measured in dollars. The conversation was interrupted by Harper's excited voice, calling them over to see something she had discovered near the playground. It was a small flower growing through a crack in the concrete, its bright yellow petals a defiant splash of color against the gray urban landscape. "Look," she said, crouching down to examine it more closely. It found a way to grow, even though there wasn't supposed to be space for it. Owen and Veronica exchanged a look over Harper's head, both understanding the metaphor without needing to acknowledge it aloud. Sometimes the most beautiful things grew in the most unlikely places, given just enough help and encouragement to find their way toward the light. Sometimes strangers became family, desperate situations became opportunities for grace, and the end of one story became the beginning of something even more meaningful. As the sun began to set over Riverside Park, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the three of them sat together on the bench that had witnessed the beginning of their unlikely family. Harper leaned against Owen's shoulder while Veronica shared stories about the Foundation's latest success stories, and for a moment everything felt exactly as it should be. "You know what I think?" Harper said sleepily, her voice soft with contentment. "I think sometimes when you help somebody, you end up helping yourself too. Like, Aunt Ronnie helped me get better, but we also helped her remember what it feels like to have a family again." The wisdom in her 8-year-old observation left both adults speechless for a moment, struck by the simple truth of it. Owen reached over to take Veronica's hand, a gesture of gratitude that had evolved into genuine affection and respect. They had all saved each other in different ways, he realized. Harper had given them both a reason to believe in the possibility of miracles. Veronica had shown them that generosity could exist without conditions. And Owen had reminded them both that the most important things in life couldn't be bought or earned, they could only be shared. The park began to empty as families called their children home for dinner. Joggers completed their evening runs, and the day shift workers were replaced by those who would watch over the city through the night. But on their bench, Owen, Veronica, and Harper remained, reluctant to break the spell of this perfect moment when everything felt possible and the future stretched ahead of them bright with promise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new families in crisis who needed help, new opportunities to pass along the gift they had received. But tonight, they were simply 3 people who had found each other when they needed it most. Proof that sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with the most ordinary moments. A desperate father, a stranger on a bench, and the courage to ask for help from someone who remembered what it felt like to need it.